Finishing up Chapter 11, and this time around picking up the notes with Telecommunications Regulation. Historically, telephone companies were regulated under what's known as an ROR framework, rate of return. What that meant was that rates were set at levels that were needed to produce enough revenues to cover total costs. So those rates were going to be regulated and basically in such a way that there's only a certain amount of profit margin that a telephone company could have made. Then in 1989, price cap regulation limits were introduced, and this would basically allow companies to have a maximum on the amount that they could charge rather than regulating the margin of profits. This change allowed companies greater flexibility in dealing with competitors and also promoting greater efficiency. So that was something that allowed for more revenue to come into telephone companies and to be able to expand some of the services that they provided. Most states have a public utility commission or a public service commission that oversees rates, regulation of local telephone service. So a lot of those rules are handed down at the state level. The 1996 Act was designed to spur competition among local and long-distance carriers by allowing entry into each other's markets, and also to allow cable companies the opportunity to provide local telephone service. So this is how telephone companies got into the programming business and cable companies got into the telephone business. In February of 2015, the FCC passed new rules on net neutrality, basically the idea of regulating the internet. So what happened was that when the rule was passed, the FCC said, quote, "Open internet rules protect and maintain open, uninhibited access to legal online content without broadband internet access providers being allowed to block, impair, or establish fast or slow lanes to lawful content." So basically what net neutrality was designed to do, attempted to do, was make it so that there was no particular control that an internet service provider could have on determining which websites would get fast, efficient access or would have slow access to it. Those that were against neutrality basically said that companies have rights to protect their own interests and also have rights to provide service in such a way that it sees as the best fit for its particular customers, whereas those that were in favor of net neutrality basically wanted equal access for everybody when it came to the accessibility of various websites, regardless of who owned the internet service providing company and who owned the various websites. Net neutrality has since been repealed. It was repealed back in June of 2018. Every once in a while, the issue of net neutrality continues to come back up for debate. Net neutrality is very much a thing in many European countries. Other federal departments and agencies include the Department of Justice. The DOJ gauges the impact of mergers and acquisitions in media industries, particularly to determine if such actions would be in the public interest. So many times the DOJ will get involved when it comes to any sort of monopolies, when it comes to various companies, determining if it would be too monopolistic and things like that. Federal Trade Commission will oversee advertising regulation in the United States. Essentially, the FTC investigates false or deceptive advertising as well as unfair trade practices. So the FTC is the organization that will enforce truth in advertising concepts. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the NTIA, serves primarily to advise the president on telecommunications issues. And then the FAA, we talked about them earlier. The Federal Aviation Administration enforces rules requiring stations and they have basically the rules that require tower lighting for towers that are taller than a certain height. So that is going to be a condition of a broadcast license that if the tower sits over a certain height, then it is going to be required to have lighting on the tower so that it's an alert for planes that are flying through an area. Some informal regulatory forces include consumer groups, and there's various ones that are out there. Those include citizen standing, where the idea holds that the public has the right to challenge broadcasters at renewal proceedings. So whenever a station's license is up for renewal, a station is required to air announcements that it has applied for renewal of its license with the FCC, and the public are invited to write into the FCC to share their thoughts on the idea of a station owner getting a renewal of that license. Media watchdog groups have been particularly active in filing indecency complaints with the FCC. This would be groups like the Parents Television Council that monitors the content of various programming and what it deems is appropriate for public airwaves. Other groups have targeted certain types of programming, advertising, and employment practices in their protests and boycotts, and the issues here run the gamut. Any political issue that you can think of is going to be manifested in some way, shape, or form on the broadcast level as well. And other groups regularly challenging rate increases for cable and telecommunications services are also out and about in efforts to try to mitigate rising costs of various services, especially in the days where the number of companies that provide certain services are smaller and smaller because of mergers, acquisitions, and vertical integration. Then there is self-regulation. To limit possible governmental involvement, the media industries engage in various types of self-regulation. They try to fix problems on their own so that they can do it voluntarily and do it under their own terms instead of having the government come in and tell them what to do and how to do it. For many years, radio and television stations voluntarily operated under the NAB codes, which specified various rules regarding programming, advertising, and promotional activities. Over the course of time, though, as stations decided to set their own practices and standards, the NAB codes were either adapted for that station's own needs or just disregarded altogether. Stations routinely scrutinize advertising messages and have been known to refuse commercials considered controversial. Many times this is going to be more about the reaction of the public to a certain advertising message or the content of that message, and a station can deem that it is not in the station's interest or in the public's interest to accept that advertising content. Then finally, there's the press. Criticism by the press and other agents help not only to enlighten the public, but also serve as a system of informal control, because the press can be a catalyst for the court of public opinion, and the more that stations are scrutinized for the things that they do or don't do, and the press carries that information, of course, there's the dealings of the public as a result of that, and decisions that stations have to make in the course of those things. So there you go. There is Chapter 11, and well, good bit of stuff there to think about and to talk about. So once you do your notes and your study questions, get those turned in, fill out the survey on Blackboard, and let's talk about regulation. How much of a hand should government have in broadcasting? Should there be more regulation, or should the government back off? And what responsibility do the broadcasters themselves have in terms of how they serve the public interest. Should that even be a concern, serving the public interest? We're talking about businesses, after all, for the most part. Bring your thoughts to class. We'll talk about them.